Emma stepped out of the taxi and glanced up at the glass towers of the corporate headquarters. Her plain, well-worn jacket contrasted sharply against the sleek suits bustling inside the building. She clutched her small, faded handbag a little tighter, taking a deep breath to steady the fluttering nerves in her chest. Today was her first day at a company known for its high-powered executives and polished image, an environment far from the rural town where she had grown up. Inside the vast lobby, the morning rush swirled around her like a tide. Suit-clad professionals moved with purpose, some sneaking curious glances at the newcomer who looked like she belonged elsewhere. Emma tried to keep her head down, but she couldn't escape the attention. At the center of the room stood Richard, the head of human resources, a man known for his sharp tongue and dismissive attitude toward anyone who didn't fit the corporate mold. Richard's eyes locked onto Emma as she approached the reception desk. A thin smile crept across his face, one that didn't reach his cold eyes. "You're Emma, right?" he called out, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of half the floor. "The girl from the countryside who's found her way to our big city office? Interesting. Tell me, what's a rural girl like you doing here among us city slickers?" A few nearby employees exchanged uncomfortable glances as whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Emma felt a flush creep up her neck. She opened her mouth to respond but found her voice caught somewhere between her surprise and embarrassment. Richard's gaze lingered, heavy with judgment, and in that instant, the bright hopes of her first day seemed to dim as all eyes rested on her. Richard wasted no time sealing Emma's fate for the morning. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he directed her toward a row of desks in the corner of the office, a spot far from the buzz of the executive suites and sleek meeting rooms. "Start over there," he snapped, "fetch these files, make copies, and don't bother me unless you've actually done something worth my attention." His tone was sharp, condescending, a clear message that he believed she was beneath the core work of the company. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the papers from the printer. She prepared for this day, studied the basics of office tasks and corporate conduct, but Richard's scorn felt like a wall around her. The other employees watched with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed amusement. Some whispered behind raised hands, others snickered when they thought she wouldn't hear. One of the younger women by the water cooler leaned toward a colleague and muttered loud enough for Emma to catch, "Wonder how long she'll last here." Another chuckled, "Probably not through the morning." The office air buzzed with the low hum of conversations, but for Emma, every word felt like a jab. Richard, meanwhile, strolled by, seemingly enjoying the show. As Emma struggled with the old copier, which jammed repeatedly, he called out, "Need help with that, country girl? Seems like you're more suited to the farm than to office machines." The laughter that followed was muffled but unmistakable. Emma bowed her head briefly, biting her lip to keep from responding. The shame burned inside her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she focused on fixing the jammed copier, reminding herself that this was what she had signed up for. Her determination wasn't going to be extinguished that easily. The hours dragged on. Tasks she'd been asked to do were trivial, beneath her capabilities, and often menial in a way that made her feel invisible. She filed and photocopied endlessly, each completed task met with a detached nod or a snide comment from Richard when he passed nearby. "Look alive, Emma. This isn't a charity." Around her, the ambience shifted as some coworkers sneered openly. A middle-aged man at the desk beside her shook his head quietly when Richard made a cutting remark, but said nothing. Others jot notes about her unusual presence, their eyes darting from her to Richard, as if weighing her worth against his judgment. Lunch approached, and Emma escaped to the quiet of the lunchroom, hoping to gather herself away from prying eyes. The fluorescent light overhead felt harsh, the clang of plates and chatter unfamiliar and stifling. She pulled out her phone and thumbed her contacts. Should she call her longtime friend, Sarah, and confess how bad this was turning out? The thought made her stomach twist. Before she could decide, a buzz from the window caught her attention. Outside, the glare of the city's sun reflected off skyscrapers, but the view was muted behind glass. The phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sarah. "How are you settling in? Remember, you're smarter than anyone there. Don't let them fool you." Emma smiled faintly, the reminder giving her a brief warmth amidst the coldness of the office. But the reprieve was short-lived. Back in the main room, Richard's voice boomed for all to hear. "Emma, come here. The senior team is gathering, and I want you to carry the coffee. A small task but important. Make sure you don't spill it, would you? Would be a shame to see rural talent make a mess on her first day." Emma's cheeks flamed, and several heads turned. The humiliation was intentional, a reminder of how little she belonged. Her hands barely steady, she filled the trays and weaved through the clustered tables. Trying not to bump anyone, she served drinks as ordered, collecting awkward smiles and hurried thanks. Some employees barely glanced her way, reinforcing her sense of alienation. As she reached the last table, she caught a glimpse of Richard leaning back, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with satisfaction at the spectacle he'd staged. His attitude was clear. He wanted to make her apologize for showing up, an unwanted intrusion into his perfect office ecosystem. Emma's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a rising tide of resolve. But before she could process her feelings, Richard's voice rang out again. "Wait, Emma. Since you're here, why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself? Just so we know what sort of background gave her the bright idea to apply here." A hush settled as all eyes turned toward Emma. The sudden spotlight was unbearable. Every word now felt a trap, any hesitation a target. Emma opened her mouth, but Richard cut in, smirking. "No? Scared? That's what I thought. Maybe this corporate world is too much for someone used to open fields." The laughter echoed around the room, the sting harsh and unforgiving. Emma's throat tightened, her chest aching with the weight of the spotlight and the cold amusement surrounding her. She wished she could disappear, wished she could respond with more than silence. But the confidence Richard demanded seemed miles away, buried under the layers of embarrassment and judgment pressing down. She gathered her papers, ready to retreat to her small, isolated desk, hoping for an end to the endless scrutiny. As she walked back, whispers filled the room, like waves crashing over her. "Does she even have a degree?" someone wondered aloud. Another voice chimed in, "Probably just a temp. Don't expect much." Despite the overwhelming doubt, Emma clenched her fists. This wasn't the real her. She wanted to explain, to prove herself, but Richard wouldn't let up. "No leaving early either," he said loudly, stopping her as she tried to slip away. "Stick around. Maybe you'll surprise us all and actually do something useful." His tone was mocking, but also a challenge. The entire office watched, some with pity, others with brush-offs. Emma nodded silently, eyes blazing beneath the humiliation. The feeling of being trapped under a microscope, judged unfairly and relentlessly, was raw and painful. Yet deep inside, a determination began to kindle, something that wouldn't let this moment define her. She stood there, the center of attention, feeling every gaze on her as if she were made of glass, fragile, exposed, but not broken. The room waited, expectant, and somewhere within, Emma was preparing for what was to come next. The office was silent, the usual hum dimmed to a whisper as Richard's challenge hung in the air. Emma stood rooted in place for a heartbeat, the weight of every judgment, every doubting gaze pressing on her shoulders. Then, almost on a whim, she lifted her chin and spoke softly, "If you don't mind, I'd like to share something." A ripple of surprise spread across the room. Richard arched an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh. Well, this ought to be good," he sneered. Emma took a cautious step forward and glanced at the screen of the laptop left open on a nearby desk. She had a presentation loaded up, something she prepared in secret, beyond the usual expectation for someone in her supposed position. She wasn't going to just accept humiliation. This was her chance, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. Clearing her throat, she began, "Before I came here, I spent months reviewing the company's strategic plans and financial reports. While some areas are strong, there are opportunities that could be tapped into for growth and innovation, particularly in our emerging markets and digital outreach." She clicked the remote and a slide appeared, filled with detailed charts and data points. For example, our current digital marketing approach doesn't leverage current trends in consumer behavior. I've outlined a plan involving targeted campaigns based on advanced data analytics. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, confidence replacing uncertainty. Implementing these strategies could increase our market share significantly within a year. Emma's fingers moved quickly, cycling through slides that depicted in-depth market analyses, competitive landscapes, and innovative product development ideas. Each graph, each insight was precise and well-researched. The employees who moments ago had been smirking now leaned forward, eyes widening in surprise. Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. The people around him exchanged glances, a sudden shift from amusement to intrigue. "This is detailed," muttered one of the senior managers, a woman who had been stony-faced until now. "Where did you get this information?" Emma glanced briefly upward, meeting the eyes of her audience. "I accessed the company's public financial records, industry reports, and interviewed some former employees during my research. I've also studied customer feedback and market trends extensively." A young analyst whispered to a colleague, "She's right on. This stuff could actually work." Richard's usual cold demeanor cracked as irritation surfaced. "You obviously spent a lot of time on this. But since when does a new hire, especially one who looks like she just stepped off a farm, have the authority or understanding to suggest company strategy?" Emma met his gaze evenly. "I don't mean to overstep, but the facts speak for themselves. The plan I've proposed is ready for implementation with minor adjustments. The only missing part is willingness." A murmur of approval circled the room. Some employees nodded, whispering encouragement. Richard's face darkened. For a moment, he looked like he was about to dismiss the whole thing with a sarcastic remark, but the room's changing energy made him pause. Emma pressed on. "If you're open to a deeper discussion, I'm available to work with the team to refine these ideas and present a formal proposal." Her voice was calm, professional, an unexpected shift from the meek girl he'd barged in on earlier. One of the senior executives stood up, cutting through the tension. "Emma, your insights are impressive. It's clear you have a strong grasp on where the company stands and where it can go." Richard's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a thin line of silence. His eyes flicked between Emma and the others, realizing the prestige and respect she was suddenly commanding. Emma finished by thanking everyone for their time, feeling a flush of relief but also determination. They applauded, not the polite, obligatory claps, but genuine approval and surprise. Richard stayed quiet, his earlier cruel bravado replaced by reluctant acknowledgement. Emma caught a sidelong glance from him, a blend of grudging respect and disbelief. As the meeting dispersed, employees approached Emma with questions, offers of collaboration, and subtle congratulations. Whispers of admiration mixed with surprise filled the office air. That day, the invisible barrier between Emma and the rest of the company began to crumble, fragmenting Richard's preconceived notions and the dismissive attitudes that had surrounded her. Emma stood in the middle of a changed room, no longer just the awkward newcomer but a figure commanding attention and respect. And in that moment, she felt a quiet victory, a promise of what was possible even when all odds seemed stacked against you. As whispers of awe and curiosity echoed quietly throughout the office, Emma allowed herself a brief moment of calm before addressing the group again. Her gaze swept across the now attentive faces, knowing that silence had been shattered and a new chapter had begun. "I owe you an explanation," she said softly but firmly. The room straightened, chairs slid back and heads turned with expectation. Emma continued, "My name is Emma Parker. I'm the newly appointed CEO of this company." A stunned silence fell. Eyebrows raised, jaws loosened. For a company that thrived on power and status, the revelation was seismic. Emma, the plain-dressed newcomer who had been dismissed and mocked that very morning, was the leader of the entire organization. The very fabric of assumptions had unraveled. She smiled gently, sensing the swirl of thoughts and disbelief. I chose to come here quietly, unannounced. I wanted to see how my team would treat someone who appeared different from the usual corporate mold. I wanted to experience firsthand the culture and values in practice, beyond the polished mission statements. The story behind Emma's plain attire unfolded carefully, piece by piece. I grew up in a rural town, far from the city noise and corporate scramble. Simplicity has always been a choice for me, not a limitation. My upbringing taught me resilience, humility, and the importance of hard work and integrity. She paused, eyes meeting those of a few still processing her words. The clothes I wore today are not an indication of my capabilities or my worth. I prefer substance and action over appearances. Emma's voice carried a quiet strength that rippled through the room. I wanted to remind everyone here, including myself, that value is found in effort, knowledge, and character, not in the label of a suit or the brand of a handbag. Some employees exchanged glances, absorbing a perspective unfamiliar yet inspiring. Whispers floated about her background in volunteer work and her leadership philosophy that centered on inclusion and growth from the ground up. Emma pulled a chair close to the front and sat down, lowering her voice slightly. I have spent years working in various sectors, from grassroots initiatives to high-level management. I've learned that success, to be real and lasting, depends on fostering an environment where every voice is heard and every spirit respected. She reflected a moment, thinking of the moments earlier, of Richard's scorn, the sneers, the isolation. Today's experience was humbling, even for me. But it reinforced why change is necessary. We need to build a culture where people are valued for who they are, not dismissed because of where they come from or what they look like. Emma's candor transformed the atmosphere. What had been tension and judgment now evolved into possibility and understanding. She looked around at the faces before her, some respectful, some uncertain, all awakened to a challenge. Over the coming weeks, I'll be meeting with many of you individually, she explained, to hear your ideas, your concerns, and your hopes for this company. Together, we will craft a future that balances innovation with empathy. A hand cautiously raised from the back, a young employee, tentative but eager to understand. Emma nodded encouragingly. Miss Parker, the young woman said, how do you envision changing the attitude here among leadership and staff? Emma's eyes softened. I believe change starts with example. We will foster open communication, celebrate diversity of thought, and hold ourselves accountable for respect in the workplace. Leadership must be approachable and transparent. Judgment and prejudice have no place here. Another employee leaned forward, a middle-aged man who had earlier watched the scene with concern. And how do we all move past the divisions that have formed? Emma's gaze was steady. By recognizing that every person brings value. By embracing humility to admit when we are wrong, and courage to correct our course. I want everyone here to feel they belong, not just for productivity, but because people matter. There was a stirring of something new, hope mingled with cautious optimism. Emma, once the symbol of exclusion, now embodied a vision of inclusion and growth. As the gathering ended, Emma felt a renewed purpose linking her past and present. From the quiet fields of her childhood to this towering office building, her journey had taught her to rise above judgment and to lead with heart and mind united. Walking through the corridors later, employees greeted her with warm nods and, in some cases, tentative smiles. Several approached, eager to collaborate or simply to offer thanks for her openness. Her simple clothing caught fewer curious glances now. Instead, there was recognition of substance beneath the surface. Emma paused by a window, looking out at the cityscape bathed in the afternoon sun. She drew a deep breath, both calm and energized. The unveiling of her identity wasn't just about personal vindication, it was the beginning of a transformation that extended beyond titles and appearances. The future awaited, uncertain but bright, shaped by a shared commitment to lift each other rather than tear down. Emma Parker, rural girl turned CEO, understood that her story was not just about herself, but about everyone who struggled to be seen and heard in a world quick to judge. And with that thought, she stepped forward, ready for the next steps on this remarkable journey. In the days that followed Emma's revelation, the atmosphere within the company shifted palpably. The office halls no longer echoed with whispered snickers or doubtful glances. Instead, they buzzed with an energized sense of possibility and respect. Emma moved through her new role with a grounded confidence that inspired those around her, bridging the gap between executive vision and employee experience. Richard, however, found himself increasingly isolated. The cold smirks and condescending remarks that had once marked his reign lost their sway under the fresh eyes of leadership. Slowly but inevitably, the consequences of his previous behavior became clear. In one of the weekly leadership meetings, the board addressed his conduct. "Richard," the chairwoman began, calm but firm, "we've been made aware of your treatment of Emma Parker and others who don't fit a traditional corporate mold. Such behavior is inconsistent with the culture we're striving to build. As a result, we're placing you on administrative leave while we review your role here." The room nodded in unison, a collective acknowledgement of the need for change. Concealed remorse flickered briefly across Richard's face as the weight of accountability pressed down. The once unshakable head of human resources faced a reckoning not from external forces, but from a shift in values that left no room for intolerance or prejudice. Shortly after, Richard sought a private meeting with Emma, an attempt to confront the consequences of his earlier actions. Sitting across from her in a quiet office, he spoke with an uncharacteristic humility. "Emma, I misjudged you. I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment, and for that, I am sorry. If there's anything I can do to make amends, please tell me." Emma regarded him thoughtfully, the tension in the room palpable yet tempered by her grace. "Acknowledging your mistakes is an important first step, Richard," she said gently. "The path forward is about learning and genuine change. I hope you'll take this opportunity to reflect and grow." With that, she rose, signaling a closure that was more hopeful than punitive, a possibility for redemption rooted in sincerity rather than resentment. Meanwhile, Emma's leadership flourished as she implemented strategies to foster a more inclusive culture. Open forums, mentorship programs, and ongoing dialogues about respect and collaboration became cornerstones of her tenure. Her presence was a daily reminder that leadership was as much about empathy as it was about intellect. Colleagues who once doubted her became enthusiastic supporters. Sarah, Emma's closest friend and confidant, marveled at the transformation. "You turned a harsh start into a powerful story," she said with pride. "You've shown the company, and the world, that the person behind the label is what truly counts." As weeks passed, Emma found herself walking through the office with a different sense of belonging. Greeting employees by name, sharing stories, and listening intently, she built bridges that had previously seemed impossible. On a crisp Friday afternoon, as the sun cast warm light through the tall windows, Emma stood before the company at a town hall meeting. Her voice rang clear and resolute. "We've all seen what happens when prejudice blinds us. But we've also seen what's possible when we choose respect, inclusion, and openness. My journey here wasn't just about proving my own worth. It's about showing that every one of us has value, regardless of background or appearance. Together, we are stronger." The applause that followed was genuine, heartfelt, a tribute not only to her leadership but to the culture she was helping to build. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt a deep satisfaction, a culmination of struggles, resilience, and triumph. She looked out at the faces before her, not strangers or skeptics, but collaborators and friends. Her journey from the rural fields to the corporate apex was not merely a personal victory, it was a beacon of change for a workplace willing to embrace difference and celebrate true merit. Emma's story closed with an open invitation to the viewers. What would you do if faced with such unfair treatment? Would you stand your ground or retreat? Share your thoughts in the comments below. She smiled warmly, the room still alive with energy. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to stay connected. See you in our next story. With that, a new chapter began, not just for Emma, but for everyone who dared to challenge expectations and believe in their own worth.